Coming up today, President Park Geun-hye vows to plug ahead with her deregulation drive, calling it the key to revitalizing the sluggish domestic economy. A former victim of Japan's wartime system of sexual slavery rebukes Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe for failing to apologize for his country's past wrongdoings during his recent trip to the United States. Plus, Korea's Samsung Electronics jumps 4 spots on the Forbes list of the world's biggest companies. It now stands in 18th. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Thursday, the 7th of May. You're tuned in to our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thanks as always for joining us. I'm Mark Broome. Our top story this afternoon, President Park Geun-hye led a ministers' meeting on her deregulation drive, the third of its kind, on Wednesday. She called for increased efforts to strip away excessive regulations, a key component of her economic policy. Our Chae Yusan starts us off.
President Park Geun-hye says the government is planning to focus on ensuring the public and businesses are satisfied with our deregulation drive.
우리가 규제에 묶여 있는 동안 다른 경쟁국들은 발빠르게 움직이고 있습니다. 이제 우리도 경제 회복과 청년 일자리 창출을 위해서 보다 과감한 규제 개혁에 나서야 하겠습니다.
The president took note of efforts to address the most pressing deregulatory tasks and better gauge the public's concerns. However, she also urged officials to tailor the proposed reforms to more effectively benefit the related parties and said Korea's regulatory system should be revised to meet global standards. She added that while alternatives to regulation should be considered, new regulations need to maximize the private sector's autonomy. This year, the government announced a series of new reform measures. For the first time in more than 40 years, the government will ease regulations on green belt management initially implemented to prevent urban overpopulation and to preserve the environment. The Land Ministry says it will allow the construction of facilities to manufacture and sell indigenous products on green belts to boost the income of area residents. Restrictions on restaurant and housing construction will also be eased. Officials say the deregulatory actions will focus on reducing inconveniences for residents while striking a balance between development and preserving the environment. In a move to catch up with advanced countries like the US and Japan, the Korean government will adjust regulations to permit test drives of driverless cars with the goal of commercializing them by 2020. The government also plans to offer greater support in the areas of infrastructure and technological development. Chae Yusan, Arirang News.
And Korea's economy-related ministries have also announced their plans to lift regulations, seeking to foster growth engines through foreign investment. Our Song Ji-son has the details.
Korea is gaining recognition as an attractive investment destination. But even as more investors acknowledge Korea's importance, they also say there is plenty of room for improvement. According to a survey by the Korean Chamber of Commerce, more than half of the foreign investors surveyed said Korea has increased in significance, especially after it agreed on a free trade pact with China. However, they also said the investment environment is not any more favorable than before. That is why Seoul is working to remove regulations and open doors to more investment. With the new deregulation package, Seoul is seeking to attract $30 billion in investment by 2017, a marked increase from the $19 billion record set last year. Starting next month, and for the first 2 years since their founding in Korea, companies with foreign investment will no longer have to limit the number of foreign employees to less than 20% of the workforce. In addition, foreign startups seeking to register a business will soon face less paperwork. The lifting of other regulations will give foreign companies opportunities to develop medical cosmetics and own airport maintenance services. In addition to easing regulations for foreign investors, the government will work toward fostering new growth engines on the domestic front by supporting the convergence of industries like healthcare and financial technologies. As a first step, the related ministries will help startups expedite the process of turning their ideas into products. The latest set of deregulation moves is aimed at improving efficiency and creating a greater synergy effect among government ministries and agencies. To do that, the government plans to remove redundant processes and emphasize collaboration. 송지선, Arirang News.
Now, despite an earlier agreement, the rival parties failed to pass a bill overhauling the civil servant pension system on Wednesday, the last day of the Assembly's extraordinary session. Just last weekend, it looked like the ruling Saenuri Party and the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy were united on reforms that would require public service employees to pay higher premiums while they're working and receive reduced payouts during their retirement. However, the main opposition was expecting the vote to include a bill to reform the national pension system, a separate government-run pension scheme for the general public. Ultimately, opposition party lawmakers refused to vote, blaming the ruling party for changing the terms to exclude those national pension reforms. And the presidential office has expressed regret over the National Assembly's failure on Wednesday to pass that bill to reform the country's public employee pension system. President Park's senior press secretary, Kim Song-woo, said that while the extent of reforms fell short of public expectations, bipartisan efforts to change the deficit-ridden system were recognized. Kim, however, said the party's trade-off deal to link the national pension coverage to the civil service pension reform bill concerns state finances and should be thoroughly reviewed and publicly discussed before a final decision is made. The press secretary then called on the political parties to first approve the public employee pension reforms as well as a slew of pending bills that aim to enhance the economic well-being of all Koreans. Now, following Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's recent speech to the US Congress, one Korean survivor of Japan's wartime sexual slavery is continuing her fight for an apology from the Japanese government. Lee Young-soo visited California's memorial for the so-called comfort women on Wednesday in an effort to draw attention to the horrors the victims faced. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
Visiting this monument was important, but difficult for Lee Young-soo. The statue in Glendale, California, was built to raise awareness of what happened to her and approximately 200,000 other women during World War II. Lee is 86 now, but looking at the bronze figure took her back to the day she was dragged from her family and forced into sexual servitude for the Imperial Japanese Army.
I was around this age at the time, but now I'm a lot different. I have changed so much.
Lee traveled to the U.S. to be present for Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's recent visit. She wanted to add her voice to the chorus of critics, calling for Abe to acknowledge and apologize for Japan's past atrocities in his Congress address. He was there for the speech, which did not include a new apology. She says Abe's behavior in Washington shows his deceptiveness and his Conservative Party's efforts to distort history. Most of Lee's fellow survivors of sexual slavery have died, but she's determined to keep fighting.
We will see if Abe's term in office will outlast me. I will live up to 200 to get an apology from him.
Lee's efforts have been backed up by criticism from the international community, including 187 historians who have since condemned Abe's view of history and called for a sincere apology. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
And on a related note, the Korean government plans to register records on the so-called comfort women to UNESCO World Heritage with other victimized countries whose women and girls were forced into sexual slavery for Japanese soldiers before and during World War II. Korea's Ministry of Gender Equality says it will launch an international promotion committee with countries including China, Taiwan, the Netherlands and the Philippines at the end of the month to prepare for the move. Seoul plans to emphasize that the issue was wartime sexual violence that affected many countries in the region and even further afield. The Korean government is expected to submit the application to UNESCO by the end of March next year. Now, the frosty ties between Korea and Japan over history and territory have had a negative diplomatic impact across the board, and that includes coordination on trade issues. But there could be a glint of hope on the horizon as the trade ministers of both countries are set to hold a rare round of talks later this month. Kwon-soa reports.
They are expected to be the first ministerial-level trade talks between Korea and Japan in 2 years. Korea's trade ministry says the offer to hold discussions came from Japan and that Trade Minister Yoon Sang-jik and his Japanese counterpart Yoichi Miyazawa have tentatively agreed to sit down on May 24th at the 2015 Boracay APEC meeting in the Philippines. A ministry official said strained relations over historical and territorial issues have severely limited opportunities for the two trade ministers to hold talks. With the time and place seemingly set, the two sides may finally be able to touch on the issue of a possible free trade agreement between Korea and Japan, as well as another three-way deal including China. Talks on the TPP, or Trans-Pacific Partnership, a regional trade pact being pushed hard by the White House, may also be included. Korea's trade ministry says the agenda has yet to be fixed, but the two sides are in the final stages of making adjustments. The last bilateral meeting between trade ministers of Korea and Japan took place on the sidelines of the 2013 Indonesia APEC meeting. However, Japan's territorial claims over Korea's easternmost Dokdo Island and Tokyo's lack of repentance over its wartime sexual slavery have halted further negotiations. Korea and Japan's economic relations haven't been looking good recently either. Bilateral trade dropped by almost 14% in the first quarter of this year compared to the same period last year. Analysts mainly attribute this to the weak Japanese yen, which is eating into the price competitiveness of Korean products. Kwon-soa, Arirang News.
Korea has ranked 7th in this year's global retail e-commerce index, falling 2 spots compared to 2013. In its latest report, global management consulting firm A.T. Kearney said the nation's e-commerce growth rate fell faster than other countries around it due to economic uncertainties in Korea. The United States regained the top spot, with China slipping to second place. This index ranks countries by their online market attractiveness. It takes factors like online market size, web infrastructure, consumer behavior, and potential growth into account. The global e-commerce market reached nearly $800 billion last year and is expected to grow nearly 20% this year. Forbes magazine has unveiled its list of the world's largest companies and has reinforced China's rising economic influence, but there is some good news for Korea. Park Geun-hye reports.
For the first time, Chinese banks claimed the top 4 spots on the annual Global 2000 list, making them the world's largest and most powerful companies. The list, which began in 2003, ranks companies according to a combined score of their revenues, profits, assets, and market value. The Industrial and Commercial Bank of China topped the list for the 3rd consecutive year, while Bank of China jumped 5 spots to number 4 this year, replacing JP Morgan Chase, the largest bank in the U.S. China also added more new companies to the list than any other country in the world, but the U.S. still leads with 579 companies. China follows with 232, a 5-fold jump from 2003 and enough to push Japan to 3rd place. This year's list was also a milestone for Korea. With 66 companies ranked, it eclipsed France to take the 5th place slot for the first time. Samsung Electronics jumped 4 spots to number 18, and Korea's leading cosmetics company, Amore Pacific, made its debut on the list, ranked at 1,586th. Park Geun-hye, Arirang News.
Now, millions of British people will head to the polls on Thursday for what's expected to be the tightest general election in decades. Once the results are out, Britain's political parties will likely have to hold frantic negotiations on forming a coalition that can wield a majority in Westminster. Two parties that definitely won't be forming a coalition anytime soon. David Cameron's ruling Conservative Party and Ed Miliband's main opposition Labour Party are neck and neck, tied at 35% each, according to the preliminary results of the final Guardian ICM poll. The left of centre Liberal Democrats have around 9%, while the right-wing anti-European Union UK Independence Party, commonly known as UKIP, stands at 11%. The same poll found that 73% of Brits intend to vote, which is a strikingly high number for a recent British election. Polling stations across Britain will open in just under 3 hours' time. And those are the stories we have for you at this hour. For more of the latest, don't forget to check out our website, arirang.co.kr/news, and do download our smartphone app by searching Arirang TV. Goodbye.